So continuing the davening theme, and where we left off on Thursday about interrupting Shmona Esrei. So, okay, it says here, in a case that involves a monetary matter, one may not be an interruption. So the Chai Adam writes that if one is in the middle of a Shmona Esrei and has a doubt about how he should pray, for example, if he forgot part of the prayer, and the question is whether he needs to go back, and if so, to what point? One is permitted to move from one's place to a particular place where one consults a book containing the appropriate laws, like the art scroll. It is not clear whether one is permitted in such a case to ask a question about how one should proceed with one's prayers. But it seems that the Chaya Adam found this permissible. Okay. And then it continues with a non-Jewish king. If one is accosted by a potentially violent person and is afraid he will kill him, you can interrupt your Shmona Esrei, of course. Or if it is possible, is it preferable to shorten one's prayer? If possible, then to move to the other side of the road. And this is the Pri Megadim writes that this issue requires further study. Okay, let's not go down that road. Excuse the pun. Like one's position, if it might be dangerous. So I don't know if that would apply to us. We're not going to daven in the middle of in public near a road. It's highly unlikely. So sorry about that. Okay, there we go. This one is more practical. If it is impossible, one should interrupt our speaking. It is permissible even to initiate the greeting if he perceives that otherwise he may be in danger. If it's like somebody who's not rational and who heats out, then you can greet them with a hand gesture during your Shmona Esrei. Okay, that doesn't really apply to us. Okay, but the bottom line is there's hardly any case where one should interrupt, unless it's a matter of life and death, like I said a few seconds ago. Okay. That's it. Okay, there's some more we can do next time. I must just try to look over it and see if it's practical.
Okay, guys, we're on the 60th daf in Bet. So the Gemara cites and explains another brisa regarding the precautions that a person needs to take during the plague. So the rabbis taught in the brisa, if there is a plague in the city, a person should not walk in the middle of the road, because the angel of death walks in the middle of the road. For once the angel of death has been given authority to kill widely, he proceeds out in the open. If there is peace in the city, a person should not walk on the sides of the road. For since the angel of death has no authority, he slinks along into hiding. So I'm just going to explain this a little bit in terms of what this means. Is that the Rashbash doesn't see it as a literal explanation of literally in the middle of the road compared to the side of the road. He sees it as a phrase, middle of the road, idiomatically. Guys, do you know what? If I say to you, take the middle of the road in terms of path, what does that mean to you guys?
Don't go extreme.
Less risky option.
Yes, exactly. In other words, don't do things in extremes. If you say your middle should be middle of the road, it means that you should be neither overly generous, where you're just giving all your money away, which would impoverish you, nor overly stingy, where you don't help anybody else. The middle of the road is a path where you have a balance between extremes of behavior. So he was saying that when there's a plague in your locale, you shouldn't be a middle of the roader. What does it mean? You shouldn't act in moderation in regard to your diet, your patterns, your health regimes, what you need to do is act as though there's an emergency. Don't do your normal routine. You better work out very quickly what you need to do to shake this plague. Either you have to go on zinc, vitamin C, ivermectin, whatever you need to do, booster shots, to make sure that you're not a statistical death in this case. But when there's no plague, you shouldn't go to extremes, meaning you shouldn't be either extreme in diet or in your exercise regimen. When we say extremes, we don't mean that you shouldn't exercise. Exercise with sensibility. Don't be a couch potato, and look at what sort of exercise will keep you in a healthy life state. So it says the situation dictates, according to Rashbash, the sort of reaction that you need to have. So the Brisa, regarding precautions during plagues, gives a different explanation. The rabbis taught in the Brisa, if there's a plague in the city, a person should not enter the synagogue alone, because the angel of death deposits his tools there. Now, there's no explanation that I can see in the Gemara. There are certain commentaries of the Ben Yada. I know Rav Schottenstein how often quotes him, but I don't have access to that material, so we don't know what it means by he has his tools there. But all it's saying is that we're talking about a base midrash when young children don't do any chumash learning there. There's no chumash, and there's not people there to pray in the minyan. In other words, you don't have a quorum of 10 men. You don't have a minyan. So a shul where there's no, but it's not used as a base midrash, and you can't even get a minyan, isn't worthy of divine protection. Therefore, don't think you can get shelter of divine protection in a shul that isn't fulfilling its task. That's what it's saying. Okay. Now, just going to read on another brisa that says there are certain sounds that will tell us that it's a harbinger of death. What does a harbinger mean? It means it gives you a bit of a hint of what's coming. So the rabbis taught in the brisa, if you hear the dogs howling, know that the angel of death has come to the city. If you hear the dogs making merry, know that Elijah the prophet has come to the city. The Gemara adds a qualification, but before we get to the qualification, the Shem Ishmael, or the Vieira, explains that, as you know, there are three categories of people that can communicate, for example, with the dead. Okay, or three categories of entities. Dogs not communicate; they can perceive spiritual forces. Animals in general, but dogs, because we have them as domestic pets, sometimes they get alarmed by or spooked by something we can't see. Mad people, obviously, if they're on the brink of insanity, they're not exactly in the earthly realm. They're perceptive to a lot, especially if they've got things like schizophrenia, etc., which are both neurological and biochemical conditions, as well as make them susceptible to being able to be open to spirituals, simply because that they're not limited by natural logical constraints. And the third thing is children under 3. So Rabbi Katz said that when children begin to articulate speech and they're able to explain what it is they're seeing, they're losing their gap on the spiritual world, because coming from the womb to as you get older, you start to lose that time that you had about being connected to the infinite. The more that you're on this earth. I'll give you an analogy. If you look at the generations, who's closer to seeing open miracles and Hashem and Hashem's hand? Those that are born now, or those that were born towards the period of creation, according to the Jewish
creation?
Yes, because they're closer to
it's in this week's parsha.
Correct.
The sea, the Yam Suf
exactly.
miracle. Yeah.
So that's exactly it. Is that the more attached we become to the physical, the more we under the illusion that we're not temporary sojourners on earth. people get very attached to their houses, their physicality, etc. And that sort of connection means that we don't realize that this whole spiritual world is actually uh, real, and that the physical world is an illusion. You can think of it, that's why I like the Matrix. It gave us a sense that what we experience is not real. It's purely a spiritual test to see how we react in certain conditions. But one of the ways we react in those ways is because we think it's real. Say, for example, you knew that you were playing Monopoly money and somebody stole your money. You wouldn't be upset because the money isn't real. It's only because we perceive it as real that there's some form of anger. So too, the young, before they can articulate words, and it's no coincidence, Rabbi Tat said, if they can articulate words, it means they can describe the spiritual terms. No one's ever that's died and come back and explained exactly what it's been about, and people have believed them in general. It's the odd person that has the near-death experience. So obviously the spiritual world is not meant to reveal itself to the physical world, otherwise there'd be no test. So anyway, animals are capable of seeing some metaphysical phenomena that humans typically can't use, can't sense. But they were purposely concealed from man because man's faculty of intelligence, as the Mishmuel says, that if he were to be aware of all the spiritual phenomena surrounding him, he would lose his mind. It would actually make him lose his mind because he would be able to process that. So obviously dogs can perceive it. So if you have all the dogs howling, you better get a fright, because I'm not talking about one or two in the neighborhood. But I'm saying if all the animals start reacting, you should get a slight fright. However, if the dogs make merry, I don't know what sort of sound they make when they make merry. I don't know. That means Elijah the prophet has come to the city. But the Gemara does add a qualification. It said this is only when the male dogs are around. If there are female dogs around, or there's a female in the group, the behavior might differ on account of her, because she might be on heat. And therefore the males react like they do in any species when they see some hot chick come around, is they don't act with any decorum. They get horny. So that's an exception. Other than that, we can do it. I don't know if you've ever seen, guys, remember, I think I mentioned the other day, whenever you see these nature end of days programs where there's going to be a calamity of a meteorite hitting the earth, or some tsunami or some earthquake, an earth ender, all the animals start running in one direction, all the birds fly in the same direction. If ever you see this, I said you run. Just follow the animals. Little piece of advice. Let's go on. So the Gemara returns to the subject of our Mishnah, and it's talking about the liability of fire. There's a narrative that contains two teachings about this form of damage. So Rav Ami and Bar Asi sat before Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. One master asked, Rav Yitzchak Nafka, let the master recite a halachic teaching, and the other master asked him, let us recite an Agadic teaching. Now, Rav Yitzchak Nafka began to state an Agadic teaching, but the first master would not let him. He began to state a halachic teaching, but the second master would not let him. So I just want to explain to you what's going on here. You certainly can't think that anybody on the level that's learning here will prevent his teacher from teaching him, nor would interrupt his colleague and prevent him from doing so. What it's meaning here is nobody's holding at that level of, crass behavior. What it's doing here is it's saying, and I remember Jeff Kaplan, you know my landlord, Gavin?
Yeah.
He taught me, because he was teaching Gemara, I think it was in Gemara Shabbos, if I'm not mistaken, that what do you learn? There's an argument. Do you learn something that's necessary, or do you learn something that you love in terms of Torah? In other words, how do you break up your day? Do you learn a mixture of Gemara, Halacha, Mishnah, etc.? Or do you learn what you're passionate about? What's the right thing to learn? So there's typically this argument that says if you learn what you're passionate about, it's going to promote you to want to learn. Otherwise, you're going to see it as a chore. And there's another discussion that says sometimes we've got to learn even if we're not interested, because we have to know how to a broad range of subjects in order to spiritually be as well-rounded as possible. So the answer is, one of the things we learn is that it depends how far you've gotten in your learning. Because if you don't know the basic halacha, which is why Kevin teaches us every day, and you're breaking the rules of Shabbos and Kashrut, etc., but you want to learn some Kabbalistic Madonna stuff about something ethereal, that's the wrong focus, because you're making things every day that are avoidable. When in fact you need to learn things that are going to avoid damaging you. But once you've gotten past that stage, it's encouraged to learn towards the way that you built. Some people love halacha, some people love learning them, not from me, but from real people. But anyway, the thing of it is that you've got to also direct yourself in where you love. So this is a teaching alluding to that. There were two of the greats, they're both known as masters, Rav Ami and Rav Asi, and they sat before Rav Yitzchak Nafka. So obviously, it didn't specify which one of these liked halacha and which one of these liked Agadata. I think out of respect is to not almost box them into a definition as to who liked what. But the problem is that each one wanted to learn what they wanted to learn from a passionate point of view. And it's not that he interrupted the rabbi that wouldn't let the other one learn what he wanted to learn. But they weren't that interested in terms of when somebody's interested in something, they perk up. Generally, Arthur does, he's not well, but they generally perk up, and they show a certain keenness. So neither one of them was seeming to be keen to learn what the other one wanted to learn. They had different taste. So what happens is he realized, their teacher, that he couldn't do it because he would have disappointed and made the one miserable and the other one happy. So he gave, in the meantime, a statement. He said, I'll give you an analogy. He said, listen, guys, I can see there's a problem. I'll give you an analogy. To what is this similar? It says to a man who has two wives, one young and one old. The young one pulls out his white hairs so that he will look younger of her husband. And the old one pulls out her husband's black hairs so that he will appear older. And in the end, what happens? He's bored from both sides and neither one of his wives are happy. Because at the end of the day, they've achieved nothing. What they're doing is counterproductive to each other. So he's saying, look, at the end of the day, you don't want to learn halacha and you don't want to learn a gadakta and you're coming away with nothing. At least come away with something, even if one of you is going to be disappointed. So I said, I'll tell you what, I've actually got a solution. I've thought of something to teach both of you that will cheer both of you up, something that will resonate with you. One is a Nagadic teaching and the other one is a halachic teaching, but you can learn both from this very, very specific point. So he went about to teach it. So Yitzchak Nafcha said to them, if this is the situation, I'll tell you something that is fitting response to both of you. Meaning an idea that takes both a halachic and a Gadic form, which both of you would want to hear and enjoy. That's Rashi's explanation. By the way, I thought that analogy with the guy with two wives was hysterically funny. I'm just saying, I don't know if it was when I read it, it was funny, but I just think it was funny. Generally, a guy that is married to two women will go grey rather quickly. Anyway, that's a side note. So, what is the Gadic and halachic thing that he taught them? When a fire will go forth and find thorns, the term will go forth implies that the fire will spread to someone else's property on its own. And the end of the verse says, the one who kindles the blaze shall surely pay. So again, when a fire will go forth and find thorns, in other words, I'm starting it on my property and it spreads to somebody else, the one who kindles the blaze will surely pay. So it implies as though there was somebody who actually ignited the blaze in the other person's property. That's what it's seen halachically as. So the contradiction is resolved by understanding this verse homiletically, meaning you can see it as an analogy. So how do you understand it as a morsel? The fire is the fire of sin, because remember we learned that a fire is destructive. And it's got a positive aspect. We'll go through the positive aspect just now. So the fire is a fire of sin and of destruction that burnt Jerusalem. So the fire went out by itself in the sins that were ours, and destruction followed naturally. Nevertheless, the verse continues, the one who kindled the blaze shall surely pay. The Holy One, blessed is he, said, it's incumbent upon me to pay for the blaze that I kindled. If I lit the fire in Zion, as it says, he lit a fire in Zion which consumed its foundations, and I will in the future build it again with fire. As it says, and I will be for it a wall of fire all around, and for the glory will I be in its midst. So before I go through the halachic definition, I wanted to tell you what it was discussing here. So the first thing that it was discussing is it's saying that basically, if we look at, you can see this from a Gadik in two perspectives. Why did Hashem destroy the Beis Hamikdash, the first and the second, guys?
Sinat Chinam.
Correct, and the first one?
The Romans, the Greeks, it was part of the
For the sins of?
Hellenization. Was it Hanukkah time, wasn't it?
So the thing of it is, the main source is that the physical building, Gavin, isn't the ikka. That's what it's saying here. It's that just like a shul, there's no point in going to a shul for spiritual refuge if nobody's learning Torah there and no one's Bavli there. You don't get a minyan. So too with Beis Hamikdash, when a person's not improving their midot and they can have baseless hatred against another Jew, or alternatively, they're not serving Hashem in it correctly, then the temple, there's no point. The temple is a conduit between heaven and earth, and that's where we're meant to manifest Hashem's will in the world. So therefore, the building structure itself is irrelevant. It's what's done in the building structure. There's no point in having a hospital if you're not going to heal people. And therefore, the Beis Hamikdash physical destruction was a result of the spiritual destruction which the Jewish people caused. And therefore, Hashem destroyed the Beis Hamikdash because there was no longer a point to it if we weren't using it for its function. But Hashem said, learn from this, the halachic side, that if you destroy something, you have to pay and reimburse. I'm the one that actually set the blaze by putting certain historical events in motion in order to have it destroyed because you weren't serving me in it in the proper way and treating each other well in the proper way. But I make a promise, just like halachically somebody that burns something down has to repay, I will build the final Beis Hamikdash myself. In other words, it's going to be miraculous. It's not even going to be a physical building in the way that we understand it to be. So it's Hashem's promise to build the new Beis Hamikdash. Now there's a deeper layer which is very interesting. Okay, the Chassam Sofer says that let's look at a fire. Now it says he was saying that the evil inclination is a fire that Hashem kindled in one place. Now he was saying, is a fire good or bad, or can it be both? Guys, what do you think? It's in Yoma 69b.
So it's always good and bad.
Correct. Why?
It's destructive if it gets out of hand, and it's positive if it can be used for mitzvahs, it can be used for cooking, it can be used for a million different
Correct.
types of things.
So primarily a fire's got two positive aspects. It's got warmth, and it can also cook food that would be unedible otherwise. And it can protect, by the way. It can protect if you're alone, and it can illuminate. It can lighten up.
And it gives you light. That's right.
And it can protect. But if a fire is out of hand, it can be destructive. So he said, you can think of it that a fire, if kept in your own, it says a certain amount of like sin is necessary in a certain way. Let me give you an example. He said, because the evil inclination allows us to develop and produce further generations. What does he mean? It means that we have a sexual drive. He's talking specifically about the sexual drive. And he said that has created a lot of chaos for history. However, without sexual drive, we procreate and produce children and develop further generations. So, if the fire is contained at home, in other words, you have sexual desire for your wife within the realm of a holy marriage in Kedusha, it's got a positive aspect, because even though you have a tiger for the physical and you should elevate yourself where you're not attracted to the physical, you need that in order to procreate. So it has a reason, even though it's a measure of sin in and of itself, in a certain way. In other words, it's a low level, because if you're really at the high level, you don't crave that sexual sort of desire. But it's necessary in order that we breed. It's part of our biological drive. And therefore, in your own home, it's handy. However, if you let it spread to your neighbor's home, it's not handy. Meaning, if you covet your neighbor's wife and have sex with her, that's a no-no. That's the death penalty. But to covet your own wife and to want to have sex with her is, although it's a bit base and sexually crass, it's needed, that drive, in order not only to have children, but also the glue that keeps a marriage together, because men wouldn't stick around for all the drama they get unless there was a little bit of fringe benefits. Believe me. I'm just being straight. It's the glue that sometimes repairs a difficult argument. Okay, it does. That's what it's a special thing. So God said that what he would do is he would take responsibility for the fire he caused in us originally, meaning that if we kept it in the realms of Kedusha, he'd take responsibility and make sure that we could have future generations. They would desire each other so that they could breed and continue. But he won't take responsibility for the fire that we create in somebody else's property, because that's our level of responsibility, that we don't covet the other. Okay? Now, how's this? So that Agadic teaching obviously satisfied one of the masters, but the other master craved a halachic teaching. So from the same verse you can learn halacha, which is that the Chumash opens up with damages inflicted by your property. In other words, if you have a look, by the way, the source of these things, guys, I'm going to read it to you. It's obviously, it's Shemot chapter 22, verse 5, but this analogy of the fire and the Beis HaMikdash was in Lamentations, which is Kohelet, Eicha, chapter 4, verse 11, and Zechariah, chapter 2, verse 9. So if we're learning the halachic aspect, if a fire shall go forth, class, that person didn't actually set fire to his fellow stack. Rather, he started the fire in his own yard, and it spread by itself to his neighbor's property, which then consumed grain in your neighbor's property. So described this way, it seems as though a fire is treated as your property, and just like you're liable to prevent your property from doing damage, like for example, in the case of Karen damage or Shor or damage of Shane and Regal, you're responsible for other property that causes damage, like your fire. So that's the halachic ruling. But the thing of it is, the verse concludes slightly differently. It says, it starts off about damage inflicted by your property, and then concludes that the damage is inflicted by the person himself. Now, I don't know if you remember, there was a discussion with Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. Do you remember? There was a discussion, is a fire treated halachically as one's property or as one's arrows, in other words, one's force? And it has an halachic implication, even in terms of the death penalty. We studied that. So basically, it comes out that this verse concludes with the damages inflicted by the person himself, meaning that the Torah concludes that by referring to the person as the one who kindled the blaze, it's as if he actually sets fire to the stack itself. That's the explanation by Rashi. So what happens there is when the verse shifts from the property to the fact that you're causing it yourself, you're liable as though you set fire to the stack directly. It's deemed your arrows. So then you have to realize that you're responsible for any damage that it causes. And what we've got to see is that there's a connection between the spiritual and the physical, or your or what do you call it, your agadic teaching and your halachic teaching, because although they're expressed in different terms, the core idea is the same. And what's the core idea? Is that whatever actions you do, whether it has physical damage or spiritual damage, you are responsible for it. And just like Hashem takes responsibility for every decision he makes, so too we do too. Now, guys, I know we've only gone for about 25 minutes.